Welcome to the Jenni Carlson Show. This week, I am so happy to be joined by Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt. We'll be talking about the upcoming vote for a new arena in Oklahoma City, why the mayor believes it is vital in order to keep the Thunder, and how he answers those who have been critical of the plan. But first, I want to say a word of thanks to these sponsors for supporting the Jenni Carlson Show. Oklahoma Ford Dealers, Two Fellas Movers, MidFirst Bank, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, FireLakeJobs.com, Next Gen Roofing, 988, Oklahoma's mental health lifeline. And remember, drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Also, if you're thinking about moving, let's face it, a box of pizza and a case of beer just don't work like they used to. Nobody wants to help you move. But we know two fellas that love moving. At Two Fellas Moving Company, we offer free, no-strings quotes for your move. With over 20 years experience, we've pretty much moved it all. Our services don't end at moving either. Need to do some remodeling or spring cleaning? We have you covered with dumpster rentals and junk haul services. Remember, quotes are free and there are no strings attached. If you're moving in Oklahoma, make sure to call the fellas. Visit twofellas.com for your free quote today. It has been 2 summers since Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt first started talking about the notion that the city needed a new downtown arena. Now, on December 12th, voters will decide whether we will build one. And I'm so happy to be joined by the mayor to talk about the plan, the vote, and all things arena related. Mr. Mayor, thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. Pleasure to be here. And, a belated congratulations on this new chapter in your life.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Well, speaking of new chapters, we're about to find out if our city embarks on a new one with this new arena. Let's just start very basic. You have been talking about this for a couple years now, but lay out the case for people who are getting ready to vote in December. Why is the time for this new arena now?
Yeah, well, a couple comments that kind of, I think, drive the timing, and it also kind of paints the big picture. This is really the culmination of at least 3 trends in our city's history. One is our investing in ourselves that really started 30 years ago next month. That was when MAPS passed in 1993. And we've never failed a vote since then. And we have been richly rewarded with huge population growth, huge economic growth, and ultimately the arrival of Major League professional sports, which we'll talk about a little bit more. The second major trend is our investments in arenas that really goes back 100 years. We have long understood as a community that the arena is sort of the centerpiece of our quality of life and our economy in many ways. And it certainly defines in many ways kind of how we see ourselves and how other people see us. And the first time we voted to build an arena was 1927. It's what we now know as the Civic Center, but it used to be, among other things, our basketball arena. There's some cool history there. We could do a whole podcast on the basketball history of the Civic Center, including Bill Russell coming in there and winning an all-college championship. But then we followed that up in 1962 when our community voted for the Myriad, and then in 1993 voting for what is now Paycom Center. And we've done this actually on a cadence of about every 30 years, not by design, but just because that's ultimately kind of when these venues sort of run their course, and you need to take that quantum leap forward to stay competitive. And obviously in the previous 3 iterations, it was to stay competitive with concerts and other shows. Now it's like concerts, other shows, and Major League professional sports, which brings me to kind of the third trend that is driving the timing and maybe brings me back to your original question, which is we obviously use this most recent arena to attract the NBA. And as we all know, and there's a lot of crazy things that happened between 2005 and 2008 to make that possible, because honestly, as the 42nd largest market, given free market dynamics, we wouldn't have a team because there's only 30 of them. They should be in the top 30 markets, but we have a team because of a lot of the cool things that happen. But obviously, it's always going to be a struggle until we climb into that top 30. So we got the team in 2008, and the team signed a 15-year lease. And I fully understand that normal people don't think of the relationship in that sense. They think of it as till death do you part. And they certainly didn't have 2023 circled on their calendar. But the reality is, earlier this year is when that original lease expired, and we really would have had no relationship moving forward with the team. And in some ways, you could kind of analogize them to being a an unrestricted free agent at that point. But they did agree to a 3-year extension before the expiration of that lease so we could have this conversation. But I do think it's important to kind of always bring that up because that's what's really driving the urgency here. I would argue we should be having a conversation at some point soon about a new arena because we're clearly struggling. If you really look at the metrics, I mean, it's great when we get a win here or there on the concert scene, but we are clearly struggling to compete regionally for concerts and other shows due to the inadequacies and deficiencies of our venue. And so we should be having that conversation in any case at some point. But the timing of like now is driven by the expiration of the lease. And so we have so much to benefit from, the continuation of these investments, the continuation of having a competitive arena, and obviously the continuation of a relationship with Major League Professional Sports by voting yes. By voting yes, you secure all the commitments that I just described, and you also secure a commitment from the team who has agreed in writing to play for 25 years in this new arena, and also the intervening years at Paycom while we design and construct the new arena. So you're looking at a commitment of over 30 years to Oklahoma City. That's a commitment that is twice the length of the original commitment, takes us beyond 2050. My kids will be my age by the time this expires. And it preserves all that we've enjoyed as in this new status for another generation. And then we can worry about other things, but I don't want to have to do this every couple of years. And that's why it's great to have such a long-term guarantee. But we have to do what markets our size do, and we have to commit to a venue. And I've always said, this is a hyper-competitive business. We entered it in 2008. We don't have to be in it if we don't want to be. Fortunately, we all get to decide. We get a vote. But there's not some magical way that a city that is this small gets to have a team and not make this kind of commitment. And maybe follow-up questions, I'm happy to go down. You can't offend me and you can't stump me. I'm happy to go down any road you want to go down. But that's the gist of it. And then probably the other main takeaway that a lot of people care about is that it's not a tax increase, that this would take the place of the expiring MAPS 4 tax. And so we would, basically just pay the same rate. And at paying the same rate, you get this status as a big league city for another generation. To me, that's the bottom line. That makes it a great deal for the city. But we could talk about further details if you don't want this to just be a 5-minute podcast.
Yeah, I've got some follow-ups. How about that? I think probably I know that you talk to voters. I know you talk to people about this plan. And the thing that I've heard most, and I'm guessing you have heard most, is blowback on the amount of funding coming from the Thunder itself. The team is committed to $50 million. This is a planned minimum $900 million project. What do you say to people who are just adamant that $50 million is not enough coming from the team?
Yeah, well, so if you stick with that, and I'll explain why that's not even a realistic expectation to begin with. But let's just start with, okay, draw that line in the sand. I want another 50 million, or I want another 100 million. Well, first of all, that's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I mean, I assure you that in the course of talking about this for 18 months with the team, we asked for every dollar amount that you could hope for. And ultimately, agreement requires the assent of two parties. And this is what the team would agree to. So I am very confident in saying, having lived this for a year and a half, there's not a better offer coming. So this is the offer. So it's not going to happen. So you have to live in the reality of that, right? And my job is thankless sometimes because I have to live in reality. I cannot preach fantasy. I can't offer fantasy to people. Others can do that. And that's a lot more fun. But I have to tell you what the real deal is. And so this is the deal. And so say you draw that line in the sand, you're not going to build an arena unless, X, whatever the amount is. And of course, there's probably wide diversion on what that magic number is for people. But you want it, and I'm telling you, you're not going to get it. So you're then saying that you're ready to walk away from the table. You're ready to tell the team, it's time to look elsewhere. And of course, the team has so many other options. And this is why it's not realistic to expect more. I mean, they have billion-dollar arenas right now sitting in other cities that are bigger than ours that don't have an NBA team and would love to have one. Seattle being the most notable example, Las Vegas being another example. They're proposing a multi-billion-dollar arena. You obviously have maybe not billion-dollar, but nice arenas in cities like Kansas City and Nashville that would certainly be better than what we currently have. And you certainly have an understanding that many of those much larger metropolitan areas could certainly put together an offer if they don't already have it. But they wouldn't even need to do that because there's venues like in Seattle right now today. And of course, because they already exist, they don't ask anything from the team, So, we've never received a donation like this. And it is a donation. Like, we will own the arena. So essentially the team is donating $50 million to a public project. We've never received that before. I'm excited on one hand that we've reached the level that we would even get somebody to help us build an arena. Because, in 1927, 1962, and 1993, we had to do this by ourselves. I hope as mayor that we continue to grow and someday we get those kind of offers that people love to show me that they got in San Francisco or Detroit. But those are metropolitan areas of 4 and 5 and 6 million people. It's totally different economies in those communities, right? It's actually kind of profitable to own an arena in those places. It's not a great business proposition in a market our size, but what we have always felt is we don't want to not have those things. So we're going to kind of fill the gap. We're not going to just say, well, I guess we can't have nice things in Oklahoma City because we're not big enough. We've decided to invest in those things to have those types of amenities that they have in bigger cities. So, the bottom line is you have to decide whether it's worth it. And if you're just looking at it from an economic perspective, it's worth it at almost any level, right? Because, they are responsible for over $500 million of economic impact into our community every year. And, by far, for that reason, the most important term in the agreement was its length, So we have 30 years of $500 million of economic impact coming into our city. The idea of walking away from that, saying, take that somewhere else, take that to Nashville, and over $50 million or $100 million is obviously cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's extremely short-sighted, right? The ROI on this pays off in 2 years for our community, regardless of what the team puts into the venue. So I assure you as mayor, I'll take all the money I can get for our city coffers. I'm happy to accept donations. But ultimately you can't make anyone do anything. You have to take what they offer and then make your decision, And I always tell people, I'm like, it's never been my role to walk away from the table. This negotiation over the last 18 months, I was never going to come back to the people of Oklahoma City and say, hey, you know what? Didn't like the offers I was hearing. I told the team to go ahead and leave. Didn't ask you about it. Just wanted to let you know, though. I should rightfully have, torches and pitchforks outside City Hall if I said that. This was always your decision. And my role was to present to you the best deal that the team would offer. And this is that deal. And the reality is, if we said no to it, not only, all the things I've just alluded to, but December 13th is when, if we said no, is when, 18 other metropolitan areas start sending in their offers to the team and to the league. And you've got, potential ownership groups, just like this group once was, sending offers to the team and the league. And, at some point, you have to realize you don't get one last chance, in Seattle. They kept saying no. And then one day they woke up and there was a press conference scheduled to announce that Howard Schultz had sold the team to a group from Oklahoma City. There wasn't a moment where they were like, okay, I'm serious. There probably was, and they just passed those, I guess. But at some point it just finally happens, And so the idea that we can just say no and that there's not ramifications for that when we are so small, when we are, kind of like I think I shared with you, and I'll share it here publicly, last week, Malcolm Gladwell, who a lot of people know as sort of a thinker. They don't think of him as a sports guy, but he goes on a Bill Simmons podcast. And of course, Bill Simmons has been saying there shouldn't have a team in Oklahoma City forever. You got Malcolm Gladwell on there on this podcast, and he says, I'm looking at Oklahoma City's population. I don't think they should have a team. I don't understand why they have a team. They're only 1.5 million people. That's what the world thinks, right? And that's why, throughout this campaign, I've been saying it is OKC versus the world. They don't think we can do this. They don't want us to do this. They want this team to be somewhere else. The only people who want this team in Oklahoma City are us. And we can do it, because we have local ownership, we have the wherewithal, and we have kind of possession in hand, which is 9/10 of the law, as they say. We have kind of an exclusive, negotiating period right here. But we say no, and all bets are off, and it's the floodgates open with suitors from other cities and other ownership groups. And it's just silly to think that we can compete in what would become a bidding war, with much larger players. But we have such a special opportunity here. Fortunately, I think a majority of the residents get that. But that's what's at stake. And it is definitely urgent, and it's definitely high stakes. And I have no belief that you get a second shot at this.
Obviously, there's a lot of people that there's misinformation out there. You've talked about the Thunder lease, the fact that they've agreed to be here for essentially 30 years. This money that they're putting in, I think some people believe that they have bought some part of this building. This is still a lease situation. If the city brings in concerts, if the building brings in concerts, that's the city, not the Thunder. Just clarify that for people who may be questioning.
I do think that can be important if you want to get in the weeds here. And I'll tell you, it's been one funny aspect of this, Jenni, is I have spent 2 years basically trying to turn a city of 700,000 people into amateur sports business experts, right? It kind of requires that. And this is one element of it. There are a lot of arenas that are either owned or in some cases operated by the teams. So Milwaukee was publicly financed in partnership with donations from the team, but the team fully operates it. They're the ones who go out and try to get concerts to perform at the arena, not the city or its contractor. For whatever reason, we have always owned and operated the arena, and we work with a national company called ASM, and they are our operator, and they're the ones who go out and try to get concerts and other shows. The Thunder are just tenants like everybody else. Of course, there's special tenants. We love them. We understand the impact, but legally, they're just tenants. They use the building 12 to 15% of the nights. When you think about it, 85% of the available nights at that building are not the Thunder. Are not up for grabs by the NBA. So it's it's. Again, I'll take every donation I can get, but is it really rational to expect other people who only use your building 12% of the time to pay for it? I'm surprised no one ever says, why don't we send an invoice to Paul McCartney? Why don't we send a bill to Elton John? Why aren't they chipping in? It's the reality is you don't ask, the bride to pay for the wedding venues, the construction costs. You don't pay it's just not the way it works. If you want to host those things, you're going to have to pay for it. And again, fortunately, they're willing to donate $50 million to the cause, but we have been doing this on our own for 100 years. And someday, I hope we get some more help because we're bigger and we're more in demand. But right now, we're in a hyper-competitive environment. And, as I've said, and not to belabor it, but we're really in no position to drive a hard bargain. The peers that we actually have, and I haven't said this yet, and it's important, the peers that we usually get compared to in terms of NBA cities are Memphis and New Orleans, because we're the third smallest market. And they didn't have any help with their arenas, just like we didn't in the past. It's just that's more our class of cities, comparing us to what happened in some of these massive markets, Brooklyn and San Francisco and Detroit, is just not realistic or fair. And most importantly, it's just not going to happen, And again, if we're going to win any battle, we have to be realistic about it. What good would the coaches and staff and players of this team be if they kept hoping every time they show up for a game that the league will give them 10 points to start the game because we're a small market? They're not going to get that. That's never going to happen. And there are so many challenges that a small market team on the court faces, but they're not going to get 10 points when the game starts. They have to compete on the same level playing field. It's the same way here. We're not going to get any concessions, and we're not playing in a junior version of the NBA. We have to compete.
So let's talk a little bit about the arena, because we know that the current one built bare bones. The new one we know is going to be totally different. But what exactly do we or you or anyone who's sort of thought about what this new arena could be like, what do we mean by nice or extravagant or whatever adjective we want to use? I know 2 decades ago when American Airlines Center opened down in Dallas, there was a wow factor.
Yeah.
But what are we talking about when we talk about the wow of Oklahoma City?
Yeah. And of course, the irony with American Airlines Center is, Mark Cuban wants a new one, right
It's a
now.
time
So,
for a new one, right?
yeah. Yeah. So just goes to show, right? So,
Right.
well, it's actually, look, there's definitely aspects of a new venue that are like that give you that wow factor. I'm sure the proportions of it, the aesthetics of it, the finishes, but ultimately most of the the things that really drive decision making are going to be very practical. And by practical, they're going to be revenue driving. They're going to be things that make the users of the arena money. And again, it's like you can be sort of idealistic about all this, but the reality is, like, people play sports in your arena or perform in your arena because they want to make money. That is the business that they are in. It is a business. And so one of the main ways that people make money in arenas is not the tickets. The tickets are definitely a part of that revenue, but there is a ton of, they expect to pull you into that venue and to still have you using that credit card the whole time you're there, right? So they have, all these hospitality areas. They have kind of, retail options and dining options that we can't even really comprehend if we haven't been to one of those venues. We've never seen anything like that before. We don't even really know what they're talking about if you haven't been to Fiserv Forum or Barclays Center or Chase Center in San Francisco. But the reality is these venues, these new modern arenas, are just much bigger. And I've always talked about that is the single biggest differentiator that's problematic for our current venue. Is it is the literal smallest arena in the NBA by square footage. And that also is going to play out in the concert business as well. We're too small versus our competitors. So what that means is it's got nothing to do with seats. Seating capacity is fine. People hear me say small and they always think even if I say I'm talking about square footage, they still say seats. It's got nothing to do with the seating capacity. It's about the size of the venue and outside of the bowl. So we're like 550,000 square feet, I think, roughly. And most NBA arenas are well over 750,000, and some are over 1 million, which would be basically almost twice our size. And so, the letter of intent we have with the team says that we will build an arena that is at least 750,000 square feet. So that'll be the biggest improvement. Obviously, new arena, everything's going to be new and fresh and, and different theories. I mean, if you go to Fiserv Forum, everything is open to the arena. When you're buying your hot dog, you can literally look back over your shoulder and see Giannis dunk. I mean, it's all kind of an open floor plan. I mean, all of that, I'm sure, will be things that will be considered. And obviously with the amount of money we're talking about here, we can have an upper tier arena finally. And it really will be our first NBA arena because we didn't build this arena with the NBA in mind or in town. We built it hoping we would get an NHL team. And so many things about it are geared towards that. And as you said, everything about it is bare bones. It was $90 million when we built it. We improved upon it, and now we put about $200 million into it. And that Dallas arena that you mentioned, when it opened 20 years ago, it cost over $400 million. So we are so far off as an outlier compared to other modern NBA arenas. The Clippers are about to move into a $2 billion arena. So when people say to me, boy, that sounds like a lot of money, I'm like, of course it is. But in the economics of NBA arenas, it's not even close to the most expensive arena that the NBA is going to have. But it certainly, I think, would have every opportunity to place us in the upper tier, and that's for Oklahoma City. That will be more than good enough. So, but definitely size would be the big thing. One other thing I'd say though, and it's not a revenue driver, but it is definitely an architectural opportunity. It will make a statement about a city that aspires to stay a top 20 city, and a city that aspires to raise that market rank above 42nd, and a city certainly that aspires to maintain its relationship with Major League Professional Sports. I look forward to that day when people are, when we see the renderings, because all of that still is yet to come. But and then obviously when we cut that ribbon, because it's just going to be a different look and feel than we've ever had before. I feel like people, when Scissortail opened and the Convention Center opened, they felt, oh, this is we've raised the bar. Well, this will definitely raise the bar a whole nother level. And if you look at other NBA arenas around the country, you'll know what I'm saying. They're just a different species than what we have today.
That leads me to my last question, Mr. Mayor. The success of MAPS, some of those projects you just referenced, momentum that's been built. Do you sense that people trust the process, the proven track record of MAPS, of city leaders, that will really help people as they head to the ballot on December 12th?
Yes, I think so. We have, we've pulled this a few times over the course of the last year to get a sense of where people are. And it's always been very positive because we have been on a great run for 30 years. And most people get that. You enter these campaigns and it's like we kind of get forced out of our bubble where everybody believes in MAPS and everybody believes in our city's future. And you suddenly get forced to be exposed to very negative people who, and you're like, you vote against MAPS? Like, I didn't know there were people who vote against MAPS, but of course there are, like the original MAPS. We always talk about the winning percentages. Like, here's the losing percentages. Here's the negative voters of every MAPS. It was 47%, 40%, 46%, and 28%. Obviously, the last one, MAPS 4, was the most popular. But in every case, at least 3, 4, almost 5 people out of 10 got in their cars, drove to the polling place that day to vote no, right? So you're going to have that. And I kind of I say all that to sort of brace people who are supportive of this. Like, you're going to have people in your life, especially on social media, that are they just can't vote yes. They don't know how to do it. It's not in their nature. And at some point you sort of walk away, or maybe you beg them not to vote. I don't know. That's up to you. But there's going to be people that are against this. But what I have seen, obviously, throughout the course of this campaign, and really, or in some ways over the course of 30 years, I've seen a community that a majority of our community, which is all you ultimately need, believes in our future, wants to move forward. And in this case, specifically, wants to keep OKC a big league city. And I think they understand. As I alluded to before, we've gone through this journey over the last 2 years. We've educated a lot of people about the business of sports and the realities of this. And certainly a strong majority of the city wants to keep the Thunder. And a strong majority of the city seems to understand what it takes to keep the Thunder. And what we really just need at this point is for everybody to show up, and so the polls are meaningless. Ultimately, the only one that counts is on December 12th. So we'll certainly be working hard in these next few weeks on turnout and raising awareness of it so everybody shows up and expresses the opinion that I strongly believe the majority of our residents have.
Well, Mr. Mayor, this has been great. Thanks for joining us to have this conversation. I hope we can do it again. Maybe December 13th is a good time to pencil into our calendars. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll talk about the next chapter, because this is going to be a fun journey over the next 6 years to build this thing.
That's right. That's right. Lots more to talk about with the new arena. But thanks to Mayor Holt, and thanks to all of you for watching the Jenni Carlson Show. If this was the first time hearing or watching us here, be sure to subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. And if you like what you hear, please leave a review. And remember, you can find all my work at selloutcrowd.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.